So welcome everybody with this presentation. Stefan Coetzee from the University of Pretoria. Stefan is doing quite a bit in the area of AI tutor bots, but also using AI to provide feedback to students. He is making apps with it himself, using no-code apps and a little bit help. And he tries to study what's happening with his applications that he's making. So Stephen, take it away.
Great, thank you very much. It's the first time I'm doing this presentation, so this is sort of breaking news, I guess. It's from one of our PhD students who's been working on this with us. Julia has been doing it as a PhD student with Astrid and myself supervising her. And we've been quite excited with what's coming out of this so far, so I'm looking forward to sharing this all with you today. Let me just move the slides. So just some background where we're coming from with this is, if you were in the previous session, you'll recall that I mentioned we have quite a few students in our groups. In our particular group of second-year accounting students, we've got about 440 students registered at the moment. So you can imagine how daunting that is for us to be giving personalized feedback to each one of these students as we'd ideally like to do it. It's almost impossible. It is impossible, I think, to do that. Some of our colleagues have tried with various ways of giving voice notes on WhatsApp and things, that splitting it over the year, but it's a challenge, and we need to be creative with giving the feedback to our students. So one of our initial reactions when AI became big last year, when ChatGPT was launched, is this: there must be a way we can embrace this to help us with this task of giving feedback to our students. So I did mention this earlier as well, and this is something we really are subscribing to at the moment, is that we very much feel that instructors rather than programmers need to be developing our tools now for teaching and learning. We are the ones with the background in education. We know about the learning theories, and we've just got that at the coalface experience with our students. We're also, I'm sure you've noticed this in Holland and wherever you are in the world, in the Netherlands, that our students are constantly changing, and the way they're learning seems to be changing, and what they need from us seems to be changing. So I think we need to really be taking it on our shoulders to develop the tools that we use as far as possible, and enhancing our teaching with the tools to make our teaching more effective and, dare I say it, easier. So in this paper, or this research study, the goal was we wanted to develop a prompt that could get our students good feedback from an AI model. So it's sounding a bit more research-based than the previous presentation, but that in plain English, I think, is what we were trying to do, is trying to work out, for example, a student could go and sit at ChatGPT, we have their laptop in front of them, and then upload a question and say, give me feedback on this. And there's a lot more nuance and theory behind feedback than such a simple prompt. So we wanted to go and see if we could develop a really good, solid prompt to give effective, high-quality feedback back to our students more often than not, because it isn't a perfect science yet, but giving our students a good chance for reasonable feedback. So we went through quite a process to develop this prompt, and I mentioned in my previous presentation, if you were in that session, that we actually went through that process with every one of the prompts I mentioned last time. So we have a prompt for when the student would ask the tutor a question. There's a prompt when the student would request the video. There would be a prompt if the student would request a multiple choice question. So writing those prompts is so important, and that's a skill we need to be teaching our students as well for their lives in future. So this study was around developing this prompt and how we did it, and then we evaluated the effectiveness of this prompt against a sample of our students' scripts and essays that they've submitted to us to see if it was achieving what we hoped it would achieve. So we built a web application again, and that's just what you can see on the screen at the basic starting point of the web application. This isn't publicly available yet, but if you would like to try it, I've just been a bit nervous to release it out into the wild, as they say. But if you'd like to give it a spin and like to try it, please send me your email address, and I'd be happy to give you access and you can play around with it. It's available in the accounting field and then in the health professions field as well. Lambert's been helping us in the background, as I mentioned earlier, on the health professions thing. So you're welcome. Just mention to me which bot you'd like the access to in terms of the feedback, if it's health professions or accounting. So what it does, just before we go further, what the app does, the user interface that the student will see is they can upload their question here. So be it a test question, a homework question, or something like that. And we've given them various options to be able to do that. They can copy and paste the text and they can upload the PDF. They can take a photo of it, whatever they need to do to be able to get that. Sorry, that was the wrong direction. Then the next two slides, steps I've skipped, but they can upload their own answer, and then they can upload the suggested solution if it's available. And then coming out of the feedback literacy, this is where we start making this an evidence-based intervention. We ask them to reflect themselves on what they've been doing, to do some self-reflection. And then there's a step 5 that we ask them for any particular specific areas that they want feedback on. And all of this is starting to feed into the prompts in the background that I'll share with you soon. So with all
Can
of
I
this,
ask one question?
Yes.
You said that the student has to upload a question. And do you then mean really a
Yes.
question, or is it the answer to an assignment of a teacher?
Yes. So what we're doing is what we're trying to do on this first one is that would, for example, be in the accounting field. We'll give them an economic event. Something might have happened. A basic example, they purchased this kind of an asset from somebody, and then the question would be they need to discuss it. So they'd upload the actual question that they're expected to answer. Then in the next step, they'd upload their answer to that question. So their attempt to answer the question. And then in a third step, they'd upload the instructor's suggested solution for it, if that's available. That doesn't need to be, but in the research study, we did have that available. So there's 3 sort of main data points you're looking for: is the actual scenario created by the teacher, the question they're trying to answer, then their attempt to answer it, as well as, if available, the actual suggested solution from the instructor. Because the AI model will use that suggested solution as part of its knowledge base in creating the feedback to the student. And all of this then will give a feedback report in the end to the student discussing. I did a very simple one just for the purposes, you don't need to read it on your screen, but it comes back to the student as, dear student, you've done this well, you can improve this, think about this, etc. And it's all responding to the prompt that I'll share with you soon, but it gives like a little feedback report to the students on the work that they've been doing. And then at the bottom, to continue that whole feedback loop and the feedback dialogue, the student can then actually ask questions of the AI about that feedback report, if there's something else that they want specific help with, etc., to try and just give them that personalized feedback that we battle to do with having the 400 odd students in front of us. So that's sort of the application. Just to give you an idea of how we built the application, I'll talk now the building, etc., but just the user interface, if you can just have a feeling for that. So perhaps just to recap it slightly, the student will start, this will be the welcome screen for them, and if you play with it later on, so you'll start your submission there. Then it will ask you to upload the actual question that the student's trying to answer. So what am I trying to answer? I'll upload the question to it. Then in step 2, which isn't in my slide, it will ask you to upload your answer, your attempt to answer that question. And step 3 will, if available, upload the instructor's suggested solution for that, because the AI is then going to compare yours to the suggested solution. Then step 4, you can reflect on your own attempt. How do you feel it went? What were the challenges, etc.? What do you think you've learned? The usual kind of things we expect of our students when they're reflecting on their own work. And then any specific feedback they require, any particular part of the question they battled with, they can mention that in step 5. And all of this will then collate and go into the prompt, and that will then generate for the student this report, and they can then discuss with the bot the feedback that they've received if they want to go into something in particular in more depth. I must perhaps just, sorry, on this slide mention the research study stopped at the feedback report. We'll be doing a follow-up study in terms of how well the AI can do that continuing dialogue. So that is down the line. That is not part of the study at this point in time. We focused primarily on that feedback report. So just to give it to you visually now, what you're seeing is you're seeing the web application there on the left of your screen. And you're seeing the output of the web application on the right of the screen, the two red blocks. That's sort of how you can start thinking about it in your head. So those are almost the wrappers on it. The student will input, moving from the left of your screen, will input their question, their suggested solution, their own answer, any requests they have. And then the application's going to give them the feedback reports out on the other side. The student doesn't see the parts in the middle. So in the middle is that API. And what an API is, you'll recall from the previous presentation, or if you're new today, that is a way for our web application to speak to OpenAI's language models. And their language models are the same as ChatGPT. So if you want to, for your purposes, to help you understand what you're seeing on the screen, picture ChatGPT. We've all used it. So ChatGPT, you have your screen, you have your little text field at the bottom that you can input your question. That's the left-hand side of the screen, the red block. And then ChatGPT will answer you. That's the right-hand side. But in the background, ChatGPT is speaking to its large language model. Your data is being input there and it's feeding answers out. And our application uses the same in the background as what ChatGPT is using. For this particular study, we use GPT-4. We've recently upgraded that now to GPT-4 Turbo, just for rolling this out to our students more widely. And if you do want to come and test it, you'll be using the GPT-4 model, the Turbo model in the background. So the student will put the stuff in on the left-hand side. We then build a prompt around what they're putting in to try and give them good feedback. That it's not just a case of typing in, the student uploading their question and say, give me feedback. Because ChatGPT it's almost a case of rubbish in, rubbish out. You need to really write a good prompt to get the best answer from it. So that's so important in this model. And it's that green block that we were focusing on, trying to work out what is the best way to prompt the OpenAI language model to give the best feedback to our students. So the prompt and the feedback goes to OpenAI, and then the feedback comes back from it. So that's just helping you visualize it overall. And then just as with the last session, this is a picture of the model. We used Bubble AI again, the application. We used the no-code application that we used to create the wrapper for this, that it will take our inputs, the students can put the inputs and then deliver the feedback back. So you can see on the screen, there's a replication of what you saw earlier on about 3 slides ago, where we'd asked the student to upload. And that's the visual design. And that's what's so nice about these no-code tools, is I design that in the background, and you just drag a text box on, or you drag a file upload box on. So it's very much click and drag. There is some learning to go to it. I don't want to make it sound that easy, but the more you work with it and play with it, the easier it becomes. And I'm really more than happy to help anybody if you want to find out more on this. And there's many YouTube videos and Bubble's training materials, very good. And I honestly think it is easier for you to learn the skill of doing this, to create your own teaching tools, than it is for a computer programmer, to try and become a good teacher. Because becoming a good teacher, you need all that theoretical knowledge, you need that experience in class, etc. And that's much harder to give somebody than I think it is now, thanks to these no-coding tools. And what I also often found myself doing is, when I'm trying to build this for the visual design, I know there's good ways to do visual design, but nobody's ever taught it to me. So then I go to ChatGPT and I say, right, I have this web application. I would like it to give feedback to students. And I'm on the first screen where the student needs to upload the question. Please advise what would be good user interface design. And then ChatGPT will help you with that. And then you can tell ChatGPT, right, I want to do this in Bubble. Tell me step by step how to do it. And it even goes that far to help you with that. So this is something that I think really each teacher over time can really empower yourself with, to start developing your own tools for your students and really personalizing their learning. So that's just a screenshot of Bubble where we developed this. But the research isn't about developing that. That's just the wrapper on the research. We really want to see that feedback. Now, another part of why we developed our own web application for this, on the research side, we wanted to evaluate the feedback coming back. With ChatGPT, we can't see our students all the time. And there's also all those issues about the privacy of uploading your students' material to ChatGPT, etc. So we were scared of the commercial product, and you as a teacher, again, you can create, and I'll speak about it at the end of the presentation, you can create a custom GPT, which is similar to what we've done, and your students can use that to get feedback, but you cannot see that feedback. So you lose that diagnostic benefit, where if you can now empower yourself and develop your own web application, you'll be able to see that feedback for your students, and it will hopefully improve your contact sessions with them in class. So where we started with the prompt design for this one is we went and had a look in the literature for what characterizes good feedback. What does good feedback need to contain? So I'm not going to spend too much time on that. You're welcome to go and read up. If you don't know that literature, you can go and refer to a paper that we relied on heavily by Nicol and McFarlane Dick in 2006. There are 7 characteristics of good feedback that are listed on the screen. I'm going to go through each one a little bit slower just now, but that was sort of our evidence-based starting point. We want the AI to give effective feedback. What is effective feedback? What are characteristics of that? And these are the things we wanted to achieve. So we started off this prompt. If I go through this slowly with you, this is now what we call a system prompt. So it's basically telling the language model what persona to adopt. And it helps it to start thinking what information sources it should be accessing, etc. So and this is so important in your prompt engineering, and people don't tend to do this. Even when you do a basic prompt, for example, we're developing an infographic for our department at the moment, and I often rely on ChatGPT for the design of it, because I'm not a designer. I've never learned to design. So I'll say to ChatGPT, you are a designer or an expert in design of infographics. And that just positions the way it's going to respond to you. So our first part of the prompt, we call it the system prompt, is just telling it what role it's going to play. So you are a teacher who teaches, and then if you want personalization, you can include that there. Teachers, for example, Stephen, an accounting student, or a health sciences student, or whatever the case would be for your use. Your task is to provide feedback to the student on their answer to a question. Use plain English, encourage self-assessment. Now, this is all coming from the literature, and I'll show you later on how we then padded this over time. It took many iterations to get to what you're seeing on the screen now. For instance, encourage students to reflect on their answer, identify areas where they think they did well or struggled, and then compare their self-assessment with the feedback provided. Be specific and clear in your feedback. Avoid generic phrases like good work. Be objective and use a growth mindset. So I'm basically trying to, in this first prompt, just tell the language model what role it's performing for us in this instance. And you can see how detailed that is. Then in the next prompt we feed through to it, we give the AI model the question that the student uploaded, the student's answer, if available, the teacher's answer, then goes the next, the suggested solution, the memorandum, and then any reflection the student's done on the work and any specific feedback. So that's all collected and sent through to the language model. So we've told the language model, right, you're acting as this actor. This is the information available to you that I want you to use to inform the task I'm now going to give you with the final prompt. So the final prompt is draft a report if you want it personalized to whatever the student's name is, providing feedback on their answer when compared to the teacher's answer. Start by acknowledging the effort put into the task and encourage a growth mindset. I mean, we all know from reviewing papers, you always start with the positives first, and that's the same with feedback to our students. But I'll go into detail more now on each of these. Next, thoroughly analyze and carefully inspect the student's answer to identify strengths and weaknesses. Provide detailed and specific examples of these strengths and weaknesses in the student's solution. When identifying strengths, highlight the aspects of the answer that demonstrates a good theoretical knowledge and understanding of the material. I'm not going to go through the whole thing now because we'll go through it piece by piece, but you can see how that's building up, and it's not a case of please give me feedback on the following. You've carefully constructed, you've carefully engineered this prompt now for the students. And I said it earlier as well in the earlier presentation, and it's worth repeating. We do need to teach our students how to prompt, definitely do. But you're probably going to be teaching them how to prompt in their discipline. and their discipline is not necessarily teaching. We are supposed to be the experts on creating good feedback for our students. So I'm not sure that the students should ever really be expected to go to this extreme to create a prompt for them. There is an argument from some colleagues that we must maybe teach the students that feedback literacy and basics of that they can equip themselves with a reasonable prompt. But I don't think it will go necessarily as far as what we've gone in this instance. So in the paper, the process we went through was an iterative process. The PhD student designed the initial prompt, looking at those characteristics of feedback, and then gave that to each of us to review, to give our feedback on. And the whole time we were trying to bring it back to those 7 characteristics of good feedback. So it was very much a to and fro process. It definitely wasn't a first draft and everything worked. We also then, and I'll speak to this later on, once we were happy with the first draft, we ran some sample scripts against it to see what it did. One of the big changes in that initial step was we actually found that the order that you give information to ChatGPT or to these language models is quite important. So we actually had to go and change the sequence of the information that we provided it in that big paragraph. So it's a lot of trial and error to really optimize this. And then each time we reran the same scripts again to see how was it improving? Was it getting closer to what we wanted in terms of the quality effective feedback output that we wanted? So that's the iterative process. And then the PhD students now gone and summarized this and taken each of those characteristics of the feedback and then given where in the prompt that we've tried to achieve those characteristics. So in the interest of time, I'm not going to go through too much. These first few ones we did read, but just to give you an example, let's go on to this one. Encourage positive motivational beliefs and self-esteem. That is one of the characteristics of effective feedback. So in our prompt, you will find these sentences: maintain a motivational and supportive tone throughout. Be specific, you'll remember this, and clear in your feedback. Avoid generic phrases like good work. Be objective and use a growth mindset. And that specific generic phrase, why it's there, is we noticed in early iterations, it kept saying good work. And that's meaningless because it was saying it to all the students, regardless of how bad the answer was or not. So that's why we became so specific. So it is really, it's a very, almost, I've often said to colleagues that teaching is an art and creating a prompt is an art as well. And it takes time and creativity to come up with these prompts. And then the last part of the prompt there was start by acknowledging the effort put into the task and encourage a growth mindset. Which I think you'll interestingly find is right towards the bottom of the prompt initially. So that's just some insights in how we tied each of these things to the prompt. The last point there provides information to instructors that can be used to help shape their teaching. That is one of the 7 characteristics. So the prompt doesn't do that. The prompt provides the effective feedback. Where we're able then to access that is by having our own database to be able to see the feedback given to the students. That can then serve as a diagnostic tool for our teaching and learning. But it's not something that's part of the prompt, it's part of the broader application that we're able to get that. So this question did come through, and I thought it was a slide in the previous presentation, but just now again, privacy is always an issue. The API is more secure for data usage than ChatGPT. Because in ChatGPT, as I previously mentioned, you actually have to go in and there's a setting you have to tell it, don't use this for training purposes, etc. The OpenAI, that's a default setting. And they also don't retain this data for more than 30 days, and then they delete it from their system. So all those checks and controls are more secure if you're using the API than if you're using the commercial ChatGPT product. And sorry, I should also mention with the API, there is security. You have to have an access key that's unique to your application. So people can't piggyback onto your API and cause all sorts of other nonsense there. So our design with his whole, we did the initial iteration that I mentioned to you, and then we did a subsequent iteration with another 57 students. 3 of them opted out with our ethical clearance process where we asked their permission to use the scripts for this purpose. So we were left with a sample of 57, and it was across 4 different accounting assessments. We took those scripts and we uploaded them to the web application to evaluate then the feedback it would generate back against those 7 characteristics. So we used those 7 characteristics to design the prompt, and then we wanted to now confirm that the prompt was achieving what we designed it to achieve. So it's a bit of a forwards and then backwards process. Forward looking to design it, and then looking backwards to see that it's achieving what we hope to achieve from it. Some confusion I've often had with interactions with colleagues on this is they view prompting almost as a perfect science, and it's not at all. It's not like computer programming where if you program in a sentence, the computer will always do that. That's not true with these language models. As the keynotes elaborated earlier on, it's very much a language predictive model. So there is variabilities in the outputs. So that's the reason why we took a sample, if I remember correctly, it was 15 students to do the initial iteration and prompt development, and we kept feeding those 15 in to develop the prompt until we felt we were getting to reliable, consistent, effective feedback to the students. And then we went and looked backwards with other students to see across different assessments and different students, are we still getting to something that meets this threshold for effective feedback? So there's this sort of the 2 design angles to it that we used. So in our reflection sample, when we went back, we created the feedback. We then created a rubric for ourselves to go and mark off. We print the feedback report. We take our rubric that's assessing these 7 characteristics of good feedback and how well did the AI achieve those. And you can see across the assessments and across the scores. So horizontally, you'll see the different assessments, their overall score. We used a very simple scale here because it's very elementary. Well, no, I don't want to use the word elementary. It's early day research, exploratory research. So we didn't want to be too fine in our scale. We used a scale of 1 to 3, where 1, it didn't do it, 2, it did it sort of, 3, it hit the nail on the head. So you're looking at mean scores here out of 3. And across the different assessment 1 was when we initially were developing it with that assessment. 2, 3, 4, and 5 is the next 4 assessments. And in each of these, we had roughly 15 student scripts that we were passing through. And it was quite consistent with the prompt over the different assessments. And then in terms of each feedback principle, if you look vertically, it's also done pretty well on our scale of 1 to 3 on most of those. And in some instances, hitting 3 often. For some reason, I think it's, as the keynote speaker said today, there are biases built into it, and it loves being complimentary. The feedback reports, it can be very gushing. So it does really well on that. Be positive in your feedback, perhaps more so than we do on our students' feedback. So it did meet those characteristics based on our small sample now to see if the prompt was working. And there we've got it there. It always encouraged further dialogue, and it was also very positive and motivational. And then the last one, that was just because of the design, we have access to the database. And then the ones with the circles, it did a fair job, a job that I as a teacher will feel happy that the feedback my students are getting is really more often than not going to help them and enhance their learning process going forward on the other characteristics of the feedback. So to end off with, I've spoken about enabling ourselves as instructors to build an application with a no-code tool such as Bubble. You can also now in GPT create these custom GPTs for your students, and you can give them access to that. The problem with this is to access a GPT, your student must have a subscription to ChatGPT. It's not available on the free model. The positive, though, it's easier for you to take your baby steps, perhaps. So what we did as well is we've taken that prompt that we've used in our own web application, and we've now included it in this GPT that is available in the commercial ChatGPT product for anybody to use. The disadvantage, again, is I can't see any of the feedback, etc. on this. And then there's all the privacy concerns, etc. You have to upload, students must upload stuff they have permission to upload, etc. But why I'm showing you this is because it gives you a chance to learn how to start creating prompts, and how to start creating little applications for yourself. So in ChatGPT, you'll need a subscription as well. You can go into the section of your GPTs. You can see there's that little pencil at the top. You can click on that, and then you can create a custom GPT for yourself. You can see I enjoy some English literature, and I've actually created some GPTs where I can engage with the characters out of some of these old classic books. And it's quite entertaining how well the language model, because that's the thing, speciality is language, how well it can converse with you. And you almost feel like you're chatting to the character in the book. So that was just me having some fun on the side, getting distracted. And that's one of the problems as well of ChatGPT, is our students get distracted when they're using it. So if you can give them a dedicated tool, it takes that distraction away a little bit. And that's what the screen looks like to build your own GPT. So it's going to ask you the whole time, what do you want to do, what you want to achieve? And then it's going to give you a preview on the right-hand side of what you've created so far. So it's really you're almost having a discussion with a bot builder, and then they're building it for you on the other side that you can test it as you go. Then once you've done it, you can go into the advanced settings and you can see this screen. And if you aren't happy with how ChatGPT's populated this from the questions it's asked, you can go and replace these. So under instructions, you can, for example, this prompt that we've developed and will be hopefully publishing soon in a research paper, you can take that prompt and paste it in there if you're happy with it, or you can paste it in and say, that's my first draft. Now I want to tweak it to be more suited to my purpose. And then you can change it here, and then your students can come and use this GPT for themselves. So here's just an example with one of those books that I did of what you can see in the background. I can perhaps read the instructions. Heathcliff of the Moors, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the book of Wuthering Heights. Heathcliff's one of the main characters in it. And I've said there, Heathcliff of the Moors, embodying the character from Emily Bronte's novel Wuthering Heights, speaks with a deeply reflective and intensive demeanor, typically of a Byronic hero. His interactions are characterized by a mix of heroic and villainous traits. So I've tried to give a character description there. And then a person can now go and have a discussion with Heathcliff. And the GPT model is going to use that prompt to be the person that they're chatting with. In our case, if I go back to our case, that's that system prompt as well, where I said you are giving feedback to a student, you are a teacher of this discipline, this is a student of this discipline, etc. So you can have a lot of fun while you're learning. And ultimately, having the fun helps you give better teaching products to your students. So I ended up with this note as well. This is the Springbok rugby team's logo in South Africa, Stronger Together. And I think in teaching and learning, we all as educators will be stronger together. A colleague and I were having a discussion now just before this presentation again. In this world that's advancing exponentially, you can't be a one-man army anymore. We need to be working together collaboratively, team teaching together, and working on resolving these issues collectively. And technology is enabling us, like today, to share these ideas and work together across vast differences in creating awesome learning experiences for our students. So my contact details are up there, please, if you want to get in touch. If you have any questions that you feel too shy to ask now, perhaps, or you don't want to put me on the spot, send me an email. I'm on X or the former Twitter as well. There's my Twitter handle. Just check the underscore, SA_Coetzee, to remember that South Africa Coetzee. And I'm on LinkedIn as well, so you're welcome to reach out there. Yeah, and I look forward to hearing from any of you. And if you do want to test this feedback and play around with it, by all means, send me your email address and I will activate it and send the link through to you. So yes, that is my part of the session, Sylvester. I'll hand it back to you.
Yes, great. Thank you for the presentation. A big hand of applause for Stefan for now. Great, Stefan. This is really interesting also to see, different from the first presentation. Let's go into some questions of the audience that you might be able to answer. Is there anyone who says, I want to ask you a question? Yeah, Joost.
You told us that your iterations to make the prompt, you found out that the order in which you put the instructions matters. Can you give an
Yes.
example of that, or how that changes the
Yeah,
outcome?
it's difficult, actually. It's a good question, and it's difficult for me to give you a hard and fast answer because I can't tell you that there's a specific sentence that needs to be in a specific place. What we ended up doing is, if I can give you a generic answer that's going to enable you to go and play with this, you can draft a prompt for yourself. If you are like me and enjoy reading, you can perhaps create a character for yourself, like I did with Heathcliff. Write up the prompt as you feel. See the responses that it gives, because you can test it on the right-hand side of that screen. And then what you can do for yourself is perhaps take the last sentence and put it first, and then try again and see if the responses are sounding more like Heathcliff or more than you'd expect. And if it's not quite right yet, then perhaps now take the new last sentence, which was the second sentence, and move it up one place. And I haven't been able to find any scientific basis for this. But I have seen other people agreeing that the order that things are given through to these language models changes the way it responds. But the science behind how that works are really, all I can tell you is the prompt, as I shared with you earlier on, if I go back to that, is not in the sequence we wrote it initially. There are sentences that have been moved around. We might have felt that it was, I'm trying to think of one on my feet quickly where I could tell you something that we moved up. Because we did change these sequences. I think that, for example, if I remember correctly, that maintain a motivational and supportive tone throughout. That was actually in our initial drafting, because I think it's high up on those 7 steps. It was one of the first ones we did. And that was later on moved down to the bottom. So I'm giving you a very vague answer, unfortunately, because this isn't a perfect science, but I hope I'm pointing you in the right direction, and just making you aware of the order that the sentences go in can change the answer. Some people are speculating that the language models give priority to the sentences at the top more so than at the bottom. So with that, maintain the motivational support and supportive tone, it's ended up quite low down in our prompt because we found this thing was being pretty supportive anyway. So I think in the way that the language models, the bias is built into it, it's made to be nice to you. We didn't need to put so much emphasis on that. And it was doing that to too much of an extreme and not doing other parts of the feedback that we needed to address. I hope that's a long answer to a short question. Sorry.
Long answer to a short question, but I get the thumbs up from Joost. Okay, who else has a question for Stefan in this part? Yes.
Hi, my question is, did you test your tool with students? And if yes, what is their reaction? Do they like it? Do they have suggestions? I'm very curious.
Yes, that part of the research we haven't got yet too. So at this stage, all we've tested it is with student scripts and got their permission and the university's permission to use their scripts. But in terms of the user experience, that is something we still need to get to. Because we really want to, and that's why we didn't test the dialogue after the feedback reports. If I go back quickly to that screen, at the bottom, you can see the beginning of a conversation. That is something that is next on our research agenda for this. We focused at this stage just on getting the report right. And now we want to start sort of seeing the students' experience of that report. How do they engage with the report subsequently, and do some qualitative analysis of the discussion between the students and the AI about that. That is next on the research agenda. If you're interested in joining us on that, you're more than welcome. Please send me an email.
More than welcome. Do some research. Yeah.
That's awesome. Yep.
Great. There's also a question from the chat, I see, from Frederic San Giorgi. If a student provides an answer to a question that is made by ChatGPT or other AI platforms, is that a problem in the feedback system?
No, we haven't tested that. We've used ChatGPT and other assessments, but we've never given ChatGPT its own stuff back. So that's a very interesting case. I haven't experimented with that. I don't think that will necessarily, with the API, remember the API is not training the GPT model, but I've heard and read myself that if you're using ChatGPT, there is this fear of, because it's taking users and the responses and training itself on that, that it's creating this dangerous loop of teaching itself with its own things. That, for example, you might ask it a question, you're writing a blog, and then it helps you create the blog. Then you publish that blog on the internet. Then another user comes on and asks a question about that blog, and it refers to your blog for its knowledge base, but that's the blog it created, and it's going to become this horribly vicious loop. So I think it's something that we need to be aware of. I don't have the technical and scientific knowledge behind it, unfortunately, but you have prickled my curiosity now to maybe go and try that just now and see what it does.
Yes, I know on the Times Higher Education, there's an article about someone who does stuff like this. He says, well, write me an essay about X, and then ChatGPT writes the essay, and then it says, well, ChatGPT, critique your own essay, and then it starts critiquing the essay, and now improve the essay, and it starts improving it, and then critique it again. So it's something that is possible and very well doable with a ChatGPT at least.
And yes, sorry, can I just add on to that? With our students, I know a lot of us are thinking about cheating. Students are getting quite clever as well. They'll ask ChatGPT to write an essay for them, and then they ask ChatGPT to critique the essay. And then what they're also doing these days is they're taking an existing essay of theirs, uploading it to ChatGPT, and then they'll say, respond to this essay question in the same style of the attached author's writing. And I mean, that's becoming impossible for anybody to detect with all these fancy detection softwares, because it's writing it in your own words. So yes, we've got to learn how to embrace this, not fight it.
It's difficult, yeah. So I still have one or two questions, but maybe there's some other persons from the audience who would like to ask you a question. Is there anyone else who likes to ask a question to Stephen? Yes, Joost again.
Yeah, you also talked about how the system is not predictable, so it could provide different answers for the same question with the same input. I've read somewhere something about temperature, how you can adjust the predictability. Have you considered that?
Yes, you can, if you get into the fact that you know that is awesome, then you've already played around with this. When you going into the model, you can actually tweak how much output you want back in terms of what they call tokens, etc., which is basically like characters. And you can, the sensitivity of the model as well, you can move between a range, if I remember correctly, from 0 to 1. The default's 0.5. I must be honest, in playing around with that, I've always left the setting at 0.5. I've not noticed much of an issue with that. And in this research study as well, what we noticed is the variability was generally not in the content of what it responded with. It was just in the way it wrote it. And perhaps the order that it would respond to it. Or sometimes it would use bullet points instead of a paragraph. That's more in terms of the variability that we noticed, but not really in terms of technical content of a feedback report.
Okay, thanks. I had a question about the interface that you built to have the system give feedback. So why does a student need to hand in also a model answer of the teacher? Because then the student already knows the model answer. So then what would be the point? Can you explain all that?
Yes, so that is really based on our sort of circumstances and the way our course is done. So we'll, for example, give our students a theory question in accounting and in financial reporting. For example, Tesla has Elon Musk. I don't know if many of you will remember this, but he entered in a dare on Twitter with members of the South Australian government, if I remember correctly, that he would build a power bank, a battery backup system for estates in Australia. And if he didn't do it in 100 days, it would be free. And then we'd ask our students, okay, you are now the CFO of Twitter, of Tesla, and Elon Musk has made this promise. It's now year end. There's still time to go. How would this affect your financial reporting? So the student would take that scenario, can upload it. Then they'll come up with their answer to that. We've come up with what our suggested solution for that would be. So we don't want, it's almost us controlling what the AI is going to rely on in terms of that technical content. I don't want to leave it up to ChatGPT to try and predict the answer. we feel our answers with our knowledge is more reliable. So then we're going to get ChatGPT to first compare the student's answer to our answer, and then to develop the feedback based on that. If you don't upload that instructor's answer, then ChatGPT or the API is going to develop its own sort of suggested solution to be able to critique the students, if that makes sense. So we try to rather give it our answer than relying on it coming up with an answer, because as the keynote speaker said, its strength is language, not technical knowledge.
Okay, great. But it strikes me that you don't put in the model answer yourself as a teacher. Or do you say, well, this is just a generic solution, so everybody should be able to use it, not only you or not only a teacher to put it in up front?
That's a good question, Sylvester, and I think I might have misunderstood you initially. I think, and that's why I think it's so important for each teacher to be able to start building their own tools for this. It just depends on your use case. What we sort of had in mind here is, because we've got 440 students, we want to give the students a tool that they could be sitting at home and they could be doing a homework question, and they have the suggested solution for that question to compare it to, that they can then go and take their question, they can take the suggested solution and put it in here themselves, that it's empowering them. A slightly different version on this, if you'll recall from the previous session with the bots, was where we as instructors create a class, we upload the document that has the questions and the suggested solutions into it. So the student doesn't need to do that. The student logs in, joins the class chat with the code, and all that's already lying there in the background, and they can, excuse me, just have a discussion surrounding it. So it just depends how you want to, what you want to achieve with this as to how you'll design it. Does that answer your question?
Okay, this is simply a design decision you made for this system to be really a self-assessment kind of a tool.
Yes, yes. Nothing stops you designing it, though, that the instructor uploads it on behalf of the student. Not at all.
Okay, great. And the other question I had was, you did look into research in what constitutes good feedback with Nicola McFarlane, which is great. We have a person, he's not in the room, but he also tries to develop a system like this. And he says, well, what I'd like to give feedback on is using the rubric that I use for my assignments. So these rubrics, they have like these tables, say, well, how did you do with the writing? How did you do with the structure? How did you do with the contents? And then it tries to give feedback on each of the lines from the rubric. Did you also consider this?
I've played around with that personally. It wasn't part of the research study. We limited our study in terms of that. But I have played around with that myself, where sort of in our example where we're uploading that suggested solution, which is paragraphs, etc., of how we would have responded. We've tried actually playing around and putting the rubric in there, and we've even asked it to score on that rubric. And GPT 3.5, the scoring was a bit variable, but recently now with this new change to GPT-4 Turbo, the last time I played with that, it was actually scoring quite impressively. This is anecdotally just on my observation, and here's a great idea for another research paper. Anybody join us, or please do the research for us. But it looks like we're getting to a point where the AI models will be able to grade based on rubrics.
Okay, that sounds sort of scary and promising at the same time.
Yes.
So these are things that came to mind in me. Is there anybody after this discussion who still does have a question for Stefan? Stefan is now around, and he's in South Africa, so he's difficult to get hold of when he logs off, of course, except from email. Anyone with another question?
I'm addicted to X, so I'll always be there if you have a question.
Yeah, you will always be there. I know. Okay, there's no question. So I think we're very good on time again, which gives us plenty of time to go. Be served in like a half an hour or something, but please let's talk on the hallway to see what this brings to us. Stefan, thanks again for your presentation. One big round of applause for Stefan. We will most definitely be in contact because we like this stuff and see where it brings us in the future. Everybody here, thank you for being here, and hope to see you later on this day and talk further. Okay, thank you. Bye, Stefan. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.